By the early 1980s, Los Angeles was on the edge of a new kind of war, not one fought with soldiers or bombs, but with arrests, helicopters, and headlines. It was the war on drugs, and Los Angeles became one of its most visible battlefields. The promise was simple: end drug use, clean up the streets, and make America safe again. But what followed was something else entirely: an urban war that tore through families, filled prisons, and left neighborhoods scarred for generations. In the late 1970s, cocaine was already part of Los Angeles nightlife. Hollywood parties, recording studios, and Sunset Strip clubs buzzed with it. It was the drug of the wealthy, expensive, glamorous, and often portrayed as harmless. But in poorer neighborhoods, something new was emerging. Around 1981, Los Angeles police began noticing small batches of a new drug being sold in South Central: crack cocaine. It was made by cooking powder cocaine with baking soda and water, producing small rocks that could be smoked for a powerful instant high. Crack was cheap. A single hit cost as little as $5. It spread fast. By 1984, it was in every major neighborhood from Compton to Inglewood. By 1986, it had taken over the streets. That same decade, the federal government was ramping up its drug war. The phrase "war on drugs" had first been coined by President Richard Nixon in 1971, but in the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan gave it new life. Reagan declared drugs public enemy number one and poured billions into law enforcement, while Nancy fronted the famous Just Say No campaign. Los Angeles, with its growing gang problem and media visibility, became ground zero. The LAPD, the DEA, and federal prosecutors all doubled down. Helicopters hovered nightly over South Central, and SWAT-style raids became routine. The Anti-Drug Abuse Acts of 1986 and 1988 created sentencing laws that changed everything. Under the 1986 law, the punishment for trafficking 5 grams of crack was the same as for 500 grams of powder cocaine, a 100-to-1 disparity. It wasn't about science, it was about perception. Powder cocaine was the drug of the rich. Crack was the drug of the poor, mostly Black and Latino communities. The result was catastrophic. Within a few years, federal prisons filled with non-violent crack offenders. By 1989, more than 60% of all federal drug sentences involved crack, even though most cocaine users still use the powder form. On the streets, the crack trade transformed Los Angeles. Street gangs like the Crips and Bloods realized there was money to be made, more than they'd ever seen. Crack was easy to move and nearly impossible to trace. A single kilogram of cocaine could be cooked into thousands of $20 rocks, netting hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit. By 1987, Los Angeles recorded over 830 homicides, many tied to gang turf wars and drug trafficking. By 1989, the number rose above 80-70. Drive-by shootings became part of daily life in South Central. Crack didn't just destroy lives through addiction. It created an underground economy that replaced legitimate work with street profits. Families were torn apart as addiction spread. Parents disappeared into the drug trade, and children grew up in the middle of a battlefield. The LAPD responded with Operation Hammer, launched in 1987 by Police Chief Daryl Gates. It was one of the largest mass arrest campaigns in modern U.S. history. Police used armored vehicles to raid neighborhoods. They kicked down doors, patrolled the streets with floodlights, and detained thousands at a time. Entire blocks of South Central were sealed off, while officers went door to door. Between 1987 and 1990, over 50,000 arrests were made under Operation Hammer. On one weekend in April 1988, 1,453 people were arrested, but only 60 felony charges were filed, and 32 cases ever went to court. For many residents, it felt less like law enforcement and more like a military occupation. Civil rights groups accused the LAPD of racial profiling and brutality. Gates defended the operation, saying it saved lives. But even inside the department, some officers admitted the tactics only deepened mistrust. By the late 1980s, cracks began to appear in the official story. In 1996, journalist Gary Webb published his Dark Alliance series in the San Jose Mercury News, alleging that cocaine traffickers connected to the Nicaraguan Contras, a rebel group the CIA had secretly supported, had helped bring cocaine into Los Angeles during the 1980s. The implication was explosive, that drug money from South Central had helped fund America's covert war in Central America. The Central Intelligence Agency and the Justice Department denied knowingly allowing drug trafficking, and official investigations later found no evidence that the Central Intelligence Agency directly conspired to distribute cocaine. But they did confirm that Contra-linked traffickers were involved in the trade, and that U.S. agencies failed to act on reports of their activity. For many in Los Angeles, that was enough to confirm a long-held suspicion that the war on drugs was never meant to protect their neighborhoods. It was meant to control them. By 1989, Los Angeles was in crisis. The city recorded nearly 900 murders, and gang-related homicides made up more than half. Helicopters circled the skies almost constantly, and neighborhoods that once thrived with small businesses were filled with boarded-up storefronts. Community groups tried to fight back. Churches offered recovery programs. Nonprofits opened after-school centers to keep kids away from the streets. Some residents formed peace truces between rival gangs to stop the violence, but the damage was deep. Crack addiction tore through generations. Families lost homes, jobs, and futures, and the justice system, flooded with mandatory sentences, offered punishment, not treatment. By the early 1990s, public perception began to shift. Even politicians started to admit that the war on drugs had failed. Cities began funding rehabilitation programs, and sentencing reforms slowly gained traction. But for Los Angeles, the effects were permanent. Thousands of residents still carried criminal records for low-level offenses. Many never found work again. The divide between police and the community only grew wider, setting the stage for the anger that would explode in 1992 after the Rodney King verdict. The war on drugs in Los Angeles wasn't just about crack. It was about power, perception, and policy. A war that claimed to save lives, but ended up destroying far too many. Los Angeles survived, but it was changed forever. The neighborhoods hardest hit in the 1980s are still rebuilding. Addiction remains, but so does resilience. The city learned a hard lesson, that fighting a social crisis with force doesn't heal it. For the people who lived through it, the sounds of the 1980s, the helicopters, the sirens, the knocks on the door at 2 a.m. will never be forgotten.